All right. Yeah, hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode. Well, I suppose this is the first proper episode of this Blender rigging course thing, whatever I decided to name it. I still haven't settled on a name. But yeah, we will be moving forward with this in just a moment. Some things I wanted to clear up before we get started. I decided that it was better, instead of charging $10 a month or whatever it was for the courses, it's better to just have it all free, and you guys can choose to donate through the Patreon that's in the description if you find this information useful, or if that's something you're interested in, pretty much. Now, the first, my intention with this course, again, to be clear, is that at the end of it, you are able to rig any firearm, any, well, this section, it's on firearms. Later, we'll go on military stuff, then we'll go on vehicles, right? But at the end of this section, you should be able to rig any firearm super easily, right? Now, I thought it made the most sense to start with pistols because, in my opinion, these are relatively simpler to work with, and if you are doing this as a job, it is likely that you will have to start with one of these. So, there are three main categories when it comes to pistols. I guess you could call them subcategories. You have your striker fired pistols, you have your hammer fired pistols, and you have your revolvers. For this episode, we will be focusing on striker fired pistols. These are not the most difficult thing in the world. These are, I would say, quite easy, right? So, I'm not going to waste any time. We're just going to get right into it. First things first, what you want to do is you want to look up, if this is your first time doing this, I mean, you want to look up some references for the gun that you are rigging, right? This here is a Colt. What is this? What is this one again? It's a Colt Woodsman Match Tactical, is what this one is, right? It's kind of obscure, right? I just picked a random one. Starting this one's also a little bougie, um, but it should make a difference, right? Most of you guys, I would say, if you're gonna do something like this, the most likely gun that you're rigging is probably going to be a Glock, right? Or something along the a 5.7 maybe, that looks something similar to this. Now, what makes a gun a striker pistol and what makes a gun a hammer pistol, right? If you look at the hammer pistol, you can see there is a hammer, right? This is what sets off the round. In a striker fired gun, you don't have one of those at the back. This is closed up. This makes it much easier to rig, because with this one, you'd have to make an entire relationship between the slide and the hammer, such that when the slide comes back, the hammer gets pulled on and all that. You don't have to worry about that with this gun. So we're going to get started. I'm going to get rid of the others because we don't really need them, and we are going to start with this gun. Right now, assuming that you've already looked up the gun that you're gonna do, if you can look up blueprints, that would be useful. But mostly, what you want to look for are either visual cues, right, or you want to look up um, videos of the gun actually in use. I looked this one up already. It's quite obscure. I didn't find any videos of it, but I've been doing this a while. I'll probably find it won't be that big of a deal. So, when you look at your gun, right, where you give it a once over, and you look for the point where you would consider hold the base of the gun. Right now, for me, it's quite easy because I have a screw right here that I'm going to use because that's easy for me, right? And what you want to do is you want to click on your model, you want to go to edit mode, and you want to set your 3D cursor to about the middle of the gun, right? I'll explain why we're doing this in a moment. But technically, this is not the best way to do it. But in my opinion, this is the cleanest way to do it, right? And it's something that's easy to change after the fact. This is basically we're setting the pivot point of the gun, right? Where the entire gun is going to move about and rotate about and such. So you set your 3D cursor here, right? It's not exactly perfect. Doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. If it does bother you, I suppose you could do something like this, and that way it's almost exactly perfect. Right, it's right in the middle of the thing. what you do is, I suppose I'll just use this since I already have this selected. You press Shift A and you add in an armature. Now, you don't have to change your bone shapes, right? You can keep it at as these if you find that, if you prefer that, right? But what I will say, if you're going to change your bone shapes, do that at the end. For the start, just have it be the basic octahedral shapes. Octahedral is this shape right here. I'll show you at the end how to change shapes and how to color code bones and everything like that, because this way, you can know whether or not it works, right? You can decide whether the rig works, and then you can go ahead and do the color coding and bone shapes and all that. So we have this bone. I'm going to name this root bone. Again, from the last episode, you click a bone, you press F2, and then you can rename it. Okay, so we name this one root bone. Now, what we do is we select the base of our gun, and we're going to isolate it. Now we're going to see if there's any parts here in the base of the gun that are going to serve any purpose other than just being the root of the gun. What do I mean by that? Sometimes in the middle of the gun, right, you'll have the magazine release, as it is here actually. The magazine release, this is the magazine, it's called the heel release. This is a part of the root of the gun, right? But I want that to be a separate part. So what we're going to do, we're going to select it as best as we can. We press Control L, that selects all the linked meshes to that object, and we're just going to select it as best as we can. And we also have this at the top here. I'm going to select this, and that should be pretty good, I think. Yeah, that's good enough. And then what we're going to do, we're going to come down here in data. We're going to assign this as its own vertex ripple cut magazine release. Why not? Assign. Now I'm lucky because that's the only part. I don't see anything else that I would like to separate. This is not a Browning tilting barrel gun. You'll explain what that is later on. Therefore I don't have to separate the barrel. I'm going to keep the barrel as is. So I have that. I'm going to press Control I. That selects inverse. Right now the rest of the gun is selected. I know I want all of this to just be the root bone, so we're going to assign that to the root bone. Now what that means is if I click on the gun, I click on the armature, skeleton, whatever you want to call it, you press Control P, armature deform. Again, if that happens, always make sure keep transform is on. Right, and now if I move this, you'll see that the base of the gun moves, but the magazine release stays in place, so we can have that be a separate thing later on. Good start. Right, then we're going to do the same for the magazine release. We are going to set our cursor to there. We're going to grab the rig, move that, make a bone, and name that magazine release. Right, and since this was already a part of, since the magazine release mesh itself, it was already a part of the base of the gun, right? So we don't need to parent it a second time. It'll already, like, if I move this bone, it'll already move with it, right? So now what I'm going to do is, what is the magazine on this? That's the magazine, right? So what I want to be able to do is move this to about there. This model isn't absolutely perfect, so that's going to clip even though it shouldn't. It's just kind of how it is. I suppose I could make it do something. No, that's going to look stupid. We're just going to make it go back there. Now, first lesson, right? This bone should only ever have to move this much, right? It should only have to move between these 2 points. Now what we're going to do, we're going to restrict the bone to move in only that much, direction, right? Or only that much. Now that we do by using constraints. So what we're going to do, we're going to set the bone as far back as we want it to go, around about there, right? You want to make sure it's not clipping anywhere. Clipping basically is that, where it's showing through the mesh, but doesn't seem to be clipping. Looks good to me. I'm going to press N, and this shows me how much the bone has moved from its original position. So here we can see it's moved negative that much on the z-axis. I'm going to click that, I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to press Control Shift C, and do limit location. Alternatively, you can go down here to bone constraints, add constraints, limit location. It's just, if you memorize that hotkey, right, it'll save you, because you're going to do this a bunch, right? So maybe it saves you like 5 seconds here, but you do that for 6 bones, 5 into 6, that's what, 30 seconds. You've saved yourself almost a minute, right? And for larger projects, that adds up quick. So I'd suggest making it a habit to use the hotkey. Now, first of all, you notice here that x and y are still 0. That means I do not want it to move on the y-axis. So we set minimum x as 0 and maximum x as 0, and the same for the y. This basically means that this is now locked on the x-axis. If I wanted to, you see that there? I cannot move it. If I turn on effect transform, it cannot move on the x-axis, it cannot move on the y-axis. It physically will not let me. Right? I also know that I do not want it to move forward. It only needs to go back. Backwards movement is a minus. So I'm going to set the maximum to 0 as well. Now you can see the only direction it can move is backwards. But we can further solidify this by taking this value that we pasted here and we put that in the minimum and we turn that on. So now you see it's much easier to animate this, because instead of having to lock it to a specific axis, I can just move it. I can just press G and I can move the bone. And that's much easier for animators to work with, and that will be much more professional. It'll look more professional to someone that you show this rig to. So that's the magazine release done. It really is that simple. You have the magazine release done now. Now we're going to do the same with the slide. Not all, again, this is a special thing, right? Not all guns are going to have a slide like this. Like, for example, a Glock, the entire top section is a slide, but this one, not really. Now here, I'm going to divert a little bit from my teachings, right? A tiny bit. I explained to you in the last video that it's better to use armature deform to parent things to a slide, or to parent things to a rig, rather than parenting the object directly to the bone. Well, now I stand by that, and we're going to use that a lot. But I like to be, when I'm working with weapons, I like them to be modular. By modular, I basically mean that I want, if I find a better model for this slide, I want to just be able to slide it in here, right? Now, how do I do that? First things first, I've set my cursor to the slide where I want the slide to move from. I am going to make the bone. You can't see it because it's in the mesh, but there you go, there's the bone, and I'm going to name it slide. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to add a plane axis, and I'm going to name this slide. And, well, that's already taken. I'll just add a space there. Slide. Then I'm going to parent the empty to this bone. Now, why did I do it like this? Right? This way, the thing that the bone is actually moving is not the mesh. It's the empty that the mesh is parented to, right? Think of it like this. Let's say you're sitting on a motorcycle, right? And you're sitting on the motorcycle and you want to change out the seat, right? The seat that you're sitting on. What you normally have to do is you have to get off, change out the seat, and then get back on. If instead of changing out the seat, right, you put the motorcycle up on like a hoist, and then you just change out the entire motorcycle underneath it, you're still sitting on the same seat, but everything underneath has changed. It's a bad example, but that's kind of how I understand it, right? It'll make more sense in a moment. So we have our slide empty. We're going to click on this. We're going to click on the slide mesh now. What you need to be sure of is that the origin of the slide, right? The origin of the slide needs to be exactly the same as the position of your empty, right? Which here is the case. How do I know that? If I click on this line and I press cursor to selected, the cursor goes there. If I do the same with the slide mesh, the cursor doesn't move. That's how I know it's in the same position. I'm going to rename this just so it's easier for me. I'm going to name this Woodsman Match Standard Slide. Why not? Then I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to hold Control. I'm going to click on the slide, Control P, object, set parent to object without inverse. Again, it's going to do that. You just want to click on Keep Transform. If that doesn't fix it, that means that something else is the problem. Now, what's the problem here? Here, it must be that this slide, originally, it was parented to an empty, and as you can see there, this empty had a rotation of 90 degrees. When we parent the mesh to the empty, it's still computing this 90 degrees. It's just not showing it. So what you want to do is you want to, first of all, you want to clear the parent and keep transformation. You see that there's still a rotation there. Then you want to apply the rotation. Make sure that the origin hasn't changed. The origin is still the same. Then you parent it to the slide. And there you go. That's your problem fix. And now if I move this, you see that the slide is moving. Now, what you're going to do now is you're going to make sure that you're going to do the same thing that you did with the magazine release. You're going to move this back. What's battery stable? So that's the ejection port of this. So I would say that should move about there, right? It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect because again, for most animations, as long as it looks like that the gun is perfect, it's probably perfect, right? As long as it looks about right, it's probably fine. So now you want to you want to copy the value here again. You want to go here, limit location, and you want to paste that right there again. Again, I click on effect transform. I'll show you why in a second. Because now it works the same way, right? So now you can only bring the slide back that way. If I don't have effect transform on, you can see in the top in the value section, it's still moving it in the X and the Z axis, it's just not showing it, which I find a little unprofessional. So we put on effect transform. Okay. Now that you have this done, what we do now is we move on to the trigger. That just makes more sense to move on to it that way. If you have a Glock, as I mentioned, if you were doing a Glock or a 5.7 or any pistol that has a tilting barrel, that that the movement of the slide depends on, or basically the movement of the barrel is dictated by the movement of the slide. You also want to do that at this point. That will be taught in the next lesson because it doesn't apply to this gun specifically, right? That does apply to the 1911. That'll come after. So we're going to do the trigger now. Again, I'm lucky here because the mesh itself, or the meshes are separated, and the origin is already there, right? I don't need to set it myself. So we're gonna set the origin. We make our bone. Now here, instead of just moving down, I'm going to move the bone like that, just because I think that makes it clearer exactly what it's controlling. Name this trigger. Now this is a part that I doubt I'll find a suitable replacement for, right? The trigger is not really a part that you would want to change often, right? The slide maybe, but the trigger not so much. So with the trigger, I'm fine with just assigning it a vertex group, right? So trigger, and then just parenting it or just joining it to the base mesh. How do I do that? I set the trigger, I select the base mesh, and then press Ctrl J, and that'll mean it's already parented to it. This is a competition gun. Competition guns have much lower trigger travels, right? So normally I would say about 10 degrees of travel is about normal. For this one, would go about 5 degrees, right? And here, when you're first working with rotation, it'll be in a different space. This is a different way to compute rotations. This makes sense to basically no one. No one uses this, right? You want to use XYZ Euler, and then you grab that. And then same thing, except instead you add limit rotation. And remember, this is a positive value, so it goes in maximum. If it was a negative value, it would go in minimum, because 0 is a bigger number than -1, for example. So then 0 is the maximum, -1 is the minimum. There you go. You have that now. Now you have two more things. You have your slide release and you have your safety. Now, this is where things get interesting. This is really where you can set your rigs apart from other people's rigs. How? I'm going to show you. First of all, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to assign this as a vertex group. So assign safety, right? And we are going to grab the origin, and we make a, if it wants to show me, it doesn't want to show me. Okay, I'll just bring that out. There you go. And there you go. That's the one. Safety. And we join this to the base of the gun. I'm deliberately speeding up a little bit because I hope that in watching me do it, it makes more sense to you, right? If it doesn't, you can go back and slow down the video. That would be my recommendation if you're not following. But I'm not gonna explain every single time. At this point, I want things to start making sense to you, right? So we've parented that. Now what we're gonna do? We're gonna see how much it rotates up. This goes up about that much. That's how many degrees? That's about 15. Okay, 15. And then we set that. Now you might say, okay, when the safety is up, the slide should not be able to do that much. It should be stuck there, right? Now you're correct, and actually there's not 15 degrees. That should be more like there. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. We're gonna do 12.5. That's better. So you would say that yes, yes, and yes, if you said that, you'd be absolutely correct. And you can do that, right? That is extremely simple. It's much easier than it seems. That's going to come in the next um, class, right? Because the last class was the absolute basics. This class is getting a bit more extreme, and then the next one you'll get into more advanced stuff. If I moved into drivers and transformation constraints and all that right now, it would get a little bit overwhelming. That's why I don't want to move that far. In this one, you're just learning constraints, proper skinning, and you are learning. Well, yeah, that's it. You're learning constraints and skinning. That's all you're learning. So for now, we're going to leave it like this. And the same thing we are going to do with our slide release. So this time we're going to first of all set the slide back. Then we're going to see, actually, it should be about there. That's a better value for it. Sorry, that's a better value for it. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set a thing for it. There you go, and there you go. Slide release. I'm going to copy that, select that, select all. By the way, to select all, I'm going to edit mode on the mesh and then pressing A. Vertex groups, and you add that as a separate vertex group, and you join that by a control J. So now that works as well. You find the perfect value for that. It's about there. It's good. 3. Just make that 3. Now, by all means, right? Most people would call this rigged because every single part that's supposed to move separately, and everything has its own bones, right? And the bones even have constraints and stuff and such. We're only 20 minutes in, right? For me, it took 20 minutes. For you, it might take 2 hours. That's perfectly normal. You should not get discouraged by that. Again, I've been doing this for years. This has been my job for a really long time. You are not in that same boat, right? It's okay if your model may be more complicated than this. You don't know how to work with that model, so that's fine. As long as you understand the basics, you're fine. That's good enough. Now, you have a model and you have each part of the model separated and working as intended. Where do you go from here? First thing that I would move to is understanding the relationship between all the parts here. Now, here's actually kind of easy because, well, there are more complicated relations between parts, but what I mean is, are there any relations that are always true? What do I mean by that? The safety, for example, it only locks the slide if the safety is up and the slide is forward. If I, for example, move the slide back and try to move this up, that shouldn't work. So that relationship, it doesn't apply all of the time. So it's a more complicated one because you have to separate when it applies and when it doesn't. So we're not going to talk about that right now because that's a more complicated thing. What we are going to talk about, are there any relations that always apply? And yes, there is one. That is that everything should move with this, should move with the root bone, but it doesn't. Now, how do we change that? This is a simple case of parenting, right? So what you're going to do, you're going to tab into edit mode. You're going to select all the different bones that are supposed to move with the root bone. So what I'm doing there, I'm clicking this bone any bone. The order doesn't matter. And press shift and you select all the bones. The important thing is the bone that you want it to be parented to. So the final bone, right, that you select, that should be the main bone, so to say, right? That needs to be the bone that everything moves with. So, and that in my case, that's the root bone. Then I'm going to press Control P and I'm going to choose Keep Offset. Why are we not doing connected? Connected is a special thing. Connected you use when, for example, I can show you this here, when you have bones that are like this. They're one after the other. These are connected. But in this case, we don't have them. Because why? Because there is there's gaps between each bone, right? This isn't directly, this bone doesn't come directly after this bone, and so on. So, we are going to select all of those. Do that, Control P, Keep Offset. Now everything works, and I did forget the magazine, so we're going to do that as well. Now the magazine, I want it to be like the slide. I want that to be a separate part. I would do that. We will press, so what we're going to do, we're going to select the magazine, the rig, and then you're going to press slash. For me, it's slash on my keyboard. For you, it might be a different keybind. I'm not sure, but the default keybind is slash. You then, now from magazines, what I like to do is, you might have noticed that the other bones, the orientation of the bone doesn't really matter. For the magazine, it does, because I want the magazine to be able to slide out easily out of the magwell. I don't want it to be something that the animator has to think particularly hard about, but I want it to be something that the animator can change if they wish to, right? So how do we do that? We make an empty, first of all. Well, we're not going to make, we're going to make the empty by just going to the origin of the magazine, Shift A, plain axes, we make a magazine, right? Now what we're going to do is, instead of, this is one point where I'd make an exception. In the slide, for example, I had the bone starting from the exact same coordinate as the position of the empty. Here we're not going to do that. This is a exception I make for magazines, especially on pistols and such, right? Now, what we're going to do is, we're going to select the very top point of the magazine. We're going to set our cursor there. Then we're going to select the rig, Shift A. That adds a bone whose tail is at that point. Then we're going to select a different point in the magazine that's in that same incline. As you see, it follows the same line. We're going to set the cursor there, and we're going to set the bone there. And we're going to name this bone magazine. You might notice that I got lucky, but your bone might do something like that, right? Simple, and that'll mess you up later on. Simple solution, just come here and set roll to 0. Right, as you can see here, my trigger bone, it actually did that a little bit. Such tiny values don't matter. If it's less than 0.0 something, then it doesn't matter. But if it's 0.1, 1, 2, 3, 4, you should reset it to 0. And you don't have to do it through here. You can just press Alt-R and that'll fix it. So now you have this bone. You are going to make a magazine empty, which we actually already made. You are going to select the magazine mesh, parent it to the magazine bone. Sorry, parent it to the magazine empty, and then you parent the empty to the magazine bone. Now what you'll notice, if I bring the thing back and I move the magazine release out of the way, this slides in and out seamlessly. It's not perfectly seamless because, again, this model isn't perfect. And in real life, it wouldn't slide out like that. It'd be more like this. It would rotate a bit when it comes out of the magwell. But of course, I can show that in real time. I can show that in real time. That is up to the animator. But you can see how that makes it a tiny bit easier, right? Instead of just moving down like that, that would be harder to work with. Here, you had to have it kind of following the incline of the grip. That I find is easier for animators. But what if an animator wants to change that? They don't want it this way, right? This is where earlier parenting in bone relative comes in. If I parented this with just bone, right? What do I mean by that? If I undo this a little bit, right? And we go to this point where the magazine is not parented, and I press Control P, you should have noticed that I've been using bone relative this whole time. Right, now why did I do that? If I make this bone straight, for example, or if I do that, right, the position of the magazine empty doesn't change. Bone relative means that the empty or whatever it is parented to the bone relative to the pose position, not relative to the overall position. Now, what's the opposite of that? You have parenting with just bone. Now, the problem with that is if an animator now decides that, oh, I want to change the axis to be that. Well, if you do that, that messes up the entire gun, and you don't want that, right? You want to solve as many problems as you can as a rigger, right? You want to solve as many problems as you can, but you don't want to make solutions that people might use unapplicable, right? It's better to make it so that people don't have to use a solution than outright making a solution impossible, right? So that's why we parent with bone relative. And at that point, of course, we are not going to add any constraints to the root bone and also not to the magazine bone, because these can move anywhere. These you would it wouldn't make sense to constrict these. Now, you might think that we should parent the magazine to the root bone in the same way we did everything else. We're actually not going to do that, because the relationship between, again, between the frame of the gun, we'll call it the frame, the root of the gun, and the magazine is different to everything else. The trigger is going to move with the frame no matter what. The trigger cannot come out of the gun in normal operation. The magazine does. So this is so slowly moving into stuff that's a little bit more complicated. What we're going to do is we're going to use a separate constraint. We're going to select the root bone, then the magazine. Now, if you remember, in edit mode, you select the bone that you want to be the parent last. In this one, you select the bone that you want to be the child last. Press Control Shift C, and you select child of. Now, what that means is, if, for example, your gun is here and your magazine is there, and at this point your magazine is out of the gun, what the animator can do, they can just click set inverse and change it. I don't know why I did that. Yeah, they can just click set they can set the influence here to 0. You see that? That would basically mean that the animator can decide when that constraint applies or not. You're not going to do that yourself as a rigger, because it may be different for every single animator. You cannot account for every possible combination or every possible situation someone is animating in, so you're not going to try to do that. So, at this point, I would call this rig complete, right? At most, you'd give this a special name. I'll call this Cold Match Tactical Rig. I would give the frame of rig a name like Cold Woodsman, or just Cold Woodman, just so I know that that's the base of the gun, and I'll get rid of everything else. And there you go. You have a perfectly functioning rig. Now, this kind of rig, right? I would say it would not turn many heads, right? And that's our goal with this course. At the end we want to be making rigs that turn heads. This one would not, right? Maybe it's useful, maybe animators would find it helpful, but this is not a rig that I would say you should be proud of if you made this on your own, right? It's a good rig, don't get me wrong. Most people would be perfectly happy with using this, but it's not a rig that takes an obscene amount of skill or an obscene amount of time to make, right? Just to rip the band-aid off, you will not get many jobs if this is the kind of rigging you do, right? Maybe we will have some success making free stuff for people that people will use and they'll shout you out and stuff. Maybe you'll get a few donations, but this is not something that someone in a big company or something would use. Okay, those skills, those that we're going to teach in the next episode, right? But I can get you started in that direction in a very small way. And that is with bone shapes. So if you come down here to this data properties, object data properties, you come down to viewport display, and you go to display as. My favorite is B-bone. Now these all look massive, right? If you press A, then I believe it's Shift Alt Control S, and you can slide them down. right? Now, on the surface, it's not all that different to the octahedral bone, but it is different, and it's buried in a menu that not a lot of people use. So it seems more professional. It seems more exotic to people, right? It's a psychology thing. It's not. It took you 2 clicks, but some people will think that a rig is better purely because of this. Now, one thing you can add that is especially useful is color coding. Now, here that doesn't really apply because every single bone is meant to be interacted with. But it's a good habit to start to color code your bones. Now, how do you do that? You press A, or basically what you do, you select all the bones that you want to assign a particular color to. Right? For me, that's all of them. So I'm going to select them. I'm going to go down here to the singular bone property, viewport display, and this and bone color and pose bone color. You have a bunch of options. You can make your own custom as well. I just like this green one. So what I'm going to do, if I just click this, it only applies to this one. If I hold Alt, I'm holding left Alt next to my spacebar, and I click this, then it applies to every single bone. And then you do that for bone color as well, because pose mode only applies in pose mode. If you go into edit mode, it goes back to that. So it's easier to just make it so. There you go. This you all we made were 2 changes from a few seconds ago, right? All we made were 2 changes, but this just on the surface is a much more agreeable, this is a much more professional looking rig to most people. That is where we are going to end this episode. All right. If you guys would like to support my work, my Patreon is linked down below. Again, the course is no longer going to be Patreon exclusive. All the episodes are going to be uploaded here on YouTube. But if you would like to support me, you can either subscribe, you can like the video and all that stuff, share it around to people that might find it useful, or you can make a donation through Patreon, or you can become a member and just support my work and basically what I'm doing here. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.